Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem, Laws of Creation, poem 17, number 17 of the 38 of Autumn Rivulets. You'll recall in earlier lectures we commented that when we talk about autumn in this section, we usually are referencing or symbolizing that which is kind of old, and rivulets that which is new. And as we have looked at each one of these poems, scholars have often argued that it's kind of random the way that this section is put together, and that there's a number of poems that don't really relate. I've tried to make the argument, no, I think Whitman's way more intentional in his placement of these texts in this section called Autumn Rivulets, and I think he's very intentional as he's working specifically with this set of lines right after he did Felons, and of course, to precede Felons was crucified. Now, our assumptions that you've been working with us here at LearnStrong.net, down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, everything from the very first word, come, which we'll come back to as an invitation word in the inscriptions readings, all the way up to and including a set of introductory comments on Autumn Rivulets, and then, of course, as we just mentioned, Felons. Now, there is actually an alternative title that was considered here of this poem, though never used, called American Laws, and we're going to talk about the power of laws. Now, to begin, let's go quickly to our Nortons to be reminded very quickly of what kind of background information we have. We're told by Nortons that this poem first appeared in Leaves of Grass 1860 as number 13 in the cluster Chants Democratic. In Leaves of Grass 1867, the poem was reduced from 18 to 11 lines, resulting in the present text, which improved in concentration and effectiveness. And as we said, there is some evidence that maybe Whitman considered American Laws as being a possible title. I want to begin at the very beginning, though. I want to take us back to the poem Inscriptions for just a moment, to the very first poem in Inscriptions, to One's Self I Sing. You'll maybe remember it. One's self I sing, a simple separate person, yet utter the word democratic, the word en masse. Of physiology from top to toe I sing, not physiogeny alone, but brain alone is worthy for the muse. I say the form complete is worthy far. The female equally with the male I sing. Of life immense in passion, pulse, and power, cheerful for freest action, formed under the laws divine, the modern man I sing. It's always fascinating to be where we are in your reading of Leaves of Grass. I mean, if you picked up the deathbed edition and read every poem with me, now as you pick up Laws for Creation, to go back and look at that set of lines, you're going to hear so many echoes. But I'm going to concentrate on laws divine. Because what's the first word? Well, it is the word laws. Now, this is the 20th use of this word in, thus far, Leaves of Grass, if you want to go back and kind of and count it. And the only use of creations as a word in all Leaves of Grass is right here. Now, it is true that Leaves of Grass can be seen, as we've argued, from multiple perspectives, and one of those has to do with the whole notion of genesis, of creativity, inspiration, and the like. I mean, we just heard it in the poem that I just read at the very beginning of Leaves of Grass, so we'll pay attention to it. Notice, laws for creations. For strong artists and leaders, by the way, we're going to get several of these four of these four, if you will. For strong artists, by the way, pay attention to all the adjectives in this poem. It's quite useful. For strong artists and leaders. For fresh broods of teachers. By the way, broods gets used one and only one time in Leaves of Grass. It's right here. And after we did passage 46, 47, the great pedagogic passage of Song of Myself, and you can go back and look at that again to be reminded. This word broods comes to mind as a powerful use of the word. And of course, we as teachers love the fact that we get somehow subsumed in a word like broods. Just to remind, Whitman was a teacher himself, and so he's always, I think, thinking about education and teaching. Fresh broods of teachers, perfect literates for America. You'll maybe remember this word literates from Blue Ontario Shore, passage 12. Notice America. Again, I told you guys, when he uses the word in a poem, it's always significant. For noble savants, and you'll remember this from Song for Occupations number 3, and coming musicians. Again, back to the very first word, come. That idea of poets to come is as well central here. In other words, the laws that we're looking for, that will be the genesis of the perfect, as he will say it, the broods of teachers and the like. And then he uses the word all, which is, of course, a significant word in Leaves of Grass. All must have reference to the ensemble of the world. It's interesting the way he uses this word ensemble. We've seen it starting from Palmanac 12. And obviously there's some music background here of the world. We're going to think of passage to India. And the compact truth of the world. It's interesting that the word truth has only been used 3 times to this point in Leaves of Grass. There shall be no subject too pronounced. All works shall illustrate the divine law of indirections. And again, we're back to the laws divine, the divine laws at the very beginning. And then we're going to get 3 of these, what do you suppose? We're going to get 6 rhetorical questions now to end. What's the power of a rhetorical question? Well, in some ways, Whitman, as an iconoclast, can hide behind the power of the question, the rhetorical question. In other words, he can always say, I don't know that I necessarily posited or argued necessarily absolutely for this. I just simply raised the question. But it's pretty obvious that when we start to get into this part of the poem, it becomes a radical and a very iconoclastic passage. No question about it at all. And notice, autumn, that which is old, rivulets, that which is new. The argument is that out of the old comes the new, and especially the new laws. And I think standing behind a lot of this, as I've said to you guys before, I think Whitman having so much fun, but standing behind a lot of this is the great epic of the Aeneid. And we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net on all the books, but you'll remember in book 6, that journey into the underworld, you'll remember that the finding that's most significant for Aeneas when he's told by Anchises, his father, is that Rome will be about law. And I think that the use of the word law, of course we could talk about the logos and the way in which logos is obviously playing a part of this for Whitman and his psyche, but I think the word law comes from, for Whitman, from all the way back to the Aeneid. Notice here, what do you suppose creation is? The act of creation itself, like its genesis, its source, the purpose, the motivations. Obviously, as a poet, Whitman is thinking about this one. What do you suppose will satisfy the soul except to walk free and to own no superior? And of course, this idea of I'll cock my head any way I want comes back to mind. This idea of walking, you'll remember, by the way, walk free is only used 1 time in Leaves of Grass, and it's right here as a phrase. But you'll remember in Song of Myself 48, he says, whoever walks without sympathy walks to his funeral dressed in his own shroud. But do you remember in Song of Myself 51, who wishes to walk with me, that invitation? Notice, the idea is to walk free. Obviously, to walk free can be both literal, but probably more here metaphoric, figuratively. Like. And then finally the third, what do you suppose I would intimate to you? By the way, this is the only time intimate gets used this way as a verb. Intimate to you in 100 ways, but that man or woman, now we're going to finally get to the law, that man or woman is as good as God. Notice it isn't a question mark. You'll remember this from Song of Myself 48, right? I've said that the soul is not more than the body, and that the body is not more than the soul, and nothing, not God, is greater to one than oneself is. Radical ideology, radical theology, and here it is again. And he'll finish it. There is no God any more divine than yourself. And notice yourself capitalized. And that is what the oldest and newest myths finally mean, the culmination of it all. In other words, if the autumn, logos, is the original, then the new, or the rivulet, is finally now the new myth. And what is it in the end? That you're, just to finish it, that you or anyone must approach creations through such laws. Whoa, what did we just read? What is it that's being argued here specifically? That there is no God any more divine than yourself. Guys, I cannot emphasize the way in which, I mean, we read this today and we're like, oh, okay, he's celebrating individuality. Right. But in Whitman's own day, to read a set of lines like that would have been so unbelievably iconoclastic, so unbelievably rebellious, so unbelievably Promethean. No question about it. Well, let's jump to 2A really quickly. What is a possible message here that we can jot down? Well, I think one of the arguments he's making is that the greatest law is the law of individuality, the idea of freedom. The individual has to have the freedom to do whatever the individual wants. And in that process, then we'll define freedom, we'll define love, we'll define all of those virtues that Whitman holds so sacred. At 2B, I love these rhetorical questions and the 6 of them. I love it that he often will use these rhetorical questions when he is in a situation where, you know, he's walking on some pretty sacred territory ground and he has to be a little bit careful. So instead of coming out and saying that the individual is more important than anything else, and even God, as he does in passage 48 of Song of Myself, here he asks it in the form of a question, but it's clearly a rhetorical question. I mean, you're obviously supposed to know the answer to the question. at 3A, I mean, just think about these three titles, right, as we compare. Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance, 1841. Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, 1849. John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, 1859. What a remarkable way to kind of mark where Whitman sits in that kind of tradition of the free-thinking, the liberal idea, the most ancient use of that phrase, the most important sacred idea for Whitman, for Mill, for Thoreau, for Emerson, all the same, the celebration of the individual, which obviously leads us to 3B and the question for you that's a personal question. What are your thoughts about individuality and the power and the importance of individuality? And is it that vital? Is it that important that you retain your own individuality? And how do you balance that with the will of the group? This tension, as we say in our Big Five, between psychology and sociology, between the individual and the collective. That distinction as well that will always run through our Big Five. The epistemological position that you have, for Whitman it's usually the fallibilist position, as we've said, and of course then that notion of ontology and who are you? And fundamentally for Whitman, well, you got to be an individual or you can never be anything. Well, I hope that this reading is challenging you. Thank you.